All righty, boys and girls, welcome back to an emergency pod episode of the Red, White, Claret, and Blue Show. I am your host, solo host today, Alex Baquero. Chris is not able to join because due to some snow that we got on Sunday in North Carolina that is, I would say, a good 80% melted. Apparently, his kids are never going back to school. He said I'm allowed to say that. So for any of you around the country, kids already back in school, be grateful because apparently in North Carolina they are not. I would imagine through much of the southern United States they are not. And in a statement that I'm sure will strike fear in the hearts of parents all across the southern United States, there's more snow on the way. We are projected to get something like 3 to 5 inches, although yesterday at work someone was saying it's 9 to 11 here in North Carolina again this Saturday. Thankfully, I do not have to deal with this yet. At least I knock on wood, hopefully won't have to deal with it on Saturday either. But my sympathies go out to parents everywhere. Not about sympathies, though. This is about celebration. Dougie Luiz, another favorite of the Red, White, Claret, and Blue Show, is back. Spoke about him so much during our first year, if you want to go back and listen to any of those pods. But had to get an emergency pod out there because we felt like between Dougie coming in, Youri and McGinn's injuries, obviously the transfer window is kind of winding down. There's a lot of questions swirling on social media, a lot of questions swirling in the group chats. And so just wanted to give our 2 cents on what this means for Aston Villa, what this means for the rest of the season, why we think this kind of came together. It's a really, really weird window. So that is why I'm here 7 a.m. here in North Carolina to try and record for you all because we love you that much. So we obviously released our podcast on Monday night, recapping the Newcastle match. You can go listen to that a little bit because we do talk about how Youri got injured and what we thought that might mean for the Dougie Luiz deal. And I said that I thought it would probably come together pretty quickly if Youri was going to be out for quite a while. That unfortunately turned out to be true. And so he is in with a loan option to buy. I have not seen anywhere that it is mandatory or will be triggered by any certain number of appearances. So that's good. We're not dealing with a Harvey Elliott situation here. What is potentially concerning is the fee to bring him back. I've seen 15 to 17 million euro. I've seen this morning someone report 25 million euro. I don't know if there's any kind of add-ons that might be getting it up to that price. I said on Monday, for the player that he is right now, has hardly gotten a kick for a solid year and a half. 10 to 15 feels fair for him. 27, 28 years old. Villa already sold him once, presumably at an inflated value for his apex. So as good as he could be over 15 games, I just don't feel like 25 million is going to be worth it. Particularly with the financial predicament that Villa is in. Eventually you will get Youri Tielemans back. I don't think that even prime Dougie Luiz starts over the current version of Youri Tielemans. Who knows what's going to continue to happen with our wings? Does Allison step up? Does that all of a sudden become a position that we're using John McGinn in the left center midfield? So he very quickly becomes surplus to requirements in a crowded midfield for, again, like I said, for 12 million, for the lower end of that range, 15 million. Do I trigger that clause? Because if he can be what he was before, that's a great player for us, then yeah, maybe I do. And maybe that allows Youri to play more in the 10. But again, with a Kamara Onana double pivot, I don't necessarily know that after a year and a half, essentially away from football, Douglas Luiz is going to be a week in, week out starter for us. So great for the vibes, great for the culture of the club. I'm going to talk in a second about why I think that might actually be a good move for the stretch run. but let's not get ahead of ourselves thinking that this is going to be uh, a clause that is triggered and Douglas Luiz is making a triumphant return home. Um, so why did Villa do this? And I've been thinking about this for the 12 or so hours, 18 hours since this deal was announced. And I'm looking at the table and I'm looking at the performance of Chelsea, of Liverpool. I'm looking at a resurgent Manchester United under a caretaker manager in Michael Carrick, whose only managerial accomplishment thus far is doing a pretty bang average job at Middlesbrough, and thinking Villa have a 8-point cushion on United, a 10-point cushion on Chelsea and Liverpool. Liverpool are currently the team occupying 6th place, and there's only 15 games left. So for them to catch Villa, even a diminished Villa, even if we were starting a week in, week out double pivot of Bogart and Hemmings, I don't see Aston Villa losing that many points over the stretch run that they would drop all the way out of the top 5. That would be an epic, epic, epic collapse to teams that have not shown that they can play with any semblance of consistency over the first 23 games, over the first almost 2/3 of the season. So then why do we make this move? Why do we make this emergency move? You could well, I'll get into that in a second. The reason why I think you make this emergency move is because whether Unai Emery will admit it or not, this combined with Bailey coming back indicates to me that Villa believe that they are in a title race, and they believe that they have a really, really good shot at winning the Europa League, because players typically do not have a quick acclimatization under Unai. We've said this. Marcus Rashford is an exception. Marco Asensio, I think we all have fond memories of him, but remember, he was hot for a very short period of time before really kind of falling out of things. Was not very effective over the course of the second half of the season. That's why we didn't trigger the clause on him. So by getting guys that are already comfortable in the system, that we know can perform in Unai Emery's system, that aren't going to need to learn necessarily where they need to be, what they need to do, that is because Villa wants the transfers in this January window to hit the ground running, because they think that they can accomplish something. And that is either winning a title and or winning the Europa League. So yeah, I think that's really exciting. I think that's really interesting. Um, I think that, a secondary factor in getting this done so quickly, and particularly it being Douglas Luiz, all these guys that Leon Bailey, I mean, Tammy Abraham doesn't know Unai, but we as a club know Tammy Abraham. I think in some degree it does mean that they don't necessarily trust Amadou Onana or Ross Barkley to stay healthy. Now I was quickly searching this before I hopped on. So if I didn't get this right, I'll hold my hand up and say that's my bad for using and trusting AI. But according to, and I won't name which one because no free sponsorships on this podcast, but according to one of the major AI platforms out there, Amadou Onana has missed 45.5% of available matches for Aston Villa due to injury, nearly half. And his longest run in the squad has supposedly been about 9 matches before he gets injured again. I'm going to talk a little bit later about the games that Youri is actually going to miss, but that's 12. So you have to figure you will have Amadou Onana for half, if we're lucky, 3/4. I mean, if we're really lucky, he'll be ready for all 12. But you have to presume with the way he plays, so physical, so much running, so much power, and just the recurrent thigh and hamstring injuries that he's had, probably going to get something in that run if he's playing 90 minutes week in, week out. So expect to see rotation with him and Bogard. But Yeah, I don't know that he's gonna be ready for all 12 of those matches. So you bring someone like Douglas Luiz in, who not only can play the 8 that Youri Tielemans did, but also in an emergency if something were to happen, does also have experience playing the 6, that shielding defensive midfield role. Um, but yeah, I think otherwise, if Villa didn't care about winning the title, if Villa didn't care about winning the Europa League, if Villa only cared about finishing within the Champions League, I just really think that they would have looked elsewhere. They wouldn't have necessarily tried to get the band back together. I think that they would have tried to find guys that could have spent 6 months getting used to Unai Emery's system and kind of contribute to next year when we are ultimately in the Champions League. Because, like I said, I think that we would have weathered this storm and gotten 5th place anyway. Now, we would have been looking down the table, and it might have been another one like a couple years ago when we got 4th, where we kind of like limped over the line. But I do think that we would have gotten there in the end. So to me, this deal very much says Villa are looking up the table. Villa think that we can accomplish something, whether Unai Emery admits it or not. Um, Now, is that the right decision? I I don't know. I think it's a really cool theory, and I think if it works in some way, shape, or form, Arsenal are stumbling. They don't have a single goal scorer with more than 5 goals. Man City have proven themselves to be very fallible. You're looking at a league that the title winner could be in the low 80s. I mean, hell, could even be in the high 70s the way things are going. Um, yeah, it's a cool theory. I don't know about the long-term ramifications of this, again, because of those buy clauses. Um, I think it's a short-term Band-Aid for a long-term problem, um, of, our previous issues of poor recruitment, guys that just come in, don't necessarily cut it. Unai Emery doesn't rate, and we just kind of move them on. Again, we're really just looking at Youri Tielemans was brought up. He obviously went out and purchased Morgan Rogers. He went out and purchased Pau Torres. We're starting to see it with Ian Matson, but otherwise there haven't necessarily been a lot of guys that he's purchased that he's brought through. I've talked about this on other podcasts. We don't necessarily need to rehash that. Um, and so I see the logic. I see why this makes sense. Let's go get players that he's already familiar with, that he already knows, that he's already been successful with. Remember, we got 4th with Dougie Luiz as our double pivot. Um, but I'm just really struggling to get over the idea that if you thought these guys weren't good enough once, then why do you think he's good enough now? And I just don't see very often players in sports having success somewhere, going away, failing, and then coming back and finding the same measure of success. Um, Even players who kind of like hit a peak somewhere and then wind up kind of coming back like on loan because they took a step up or whatever. They don't necessarily recapture those same heights. Um, Jack Grealish at Everton is probably a great example. He was about at Everton's level with Aston Villa, arguably one of the top 5 players in the league. Um, Goes to Man City, doesn't cut it for a couple years. Now he's back at Everton. He's good. Don't get me wrong. Like he's very good for them. But would you say that he's like Aston Villa level Jack Grealish good? No, I wouldn't. So what are we expecting from Douglas Luiz? I've already said I don't expect Leon Bailey to be 2 years ago Leon Bailey. I've expressed my concerns about Tammy Abraham, and so I will about Douglas Luiz too. Douglas Luiz a couple years ago was one of the classiest midfielders in the Premier League that I think was well worth an $80 million price tag, or an 80 million euro price tag. And now you just heard me earlier in this podcast saying that he's worth at max 15. So, that's a big value gap to bridge. And I don't know that players are necessarily up for that. So we have now invested between Tammy and a potential full Douglas Luiz deal for a PSR strap club, you know, potentially up to 55 million euro plus a promising young left center back in Ashkin for what? I expressed my concerns about Tammy Abraham. I guess I'm a little concerned about Douglas Luiz too. Now, I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth here and say Chris loves to mention in recent pods Guillaume Balaguer's book, where he essentially says that the reason why Villa sold Douglas Luiz when they did, yes, PSR was a concern, obviously, and he was a big PSR sale who had to go. But also Unai Emery kind of felt that Douglas Luiz had reached his peak. He was not going to continue to get better, and so he was someone that they could move on to get players to rejuvenate the squad. Obviously, neither of those guys made the cut at Villa in terms of Enzo and Sammy Ills. But like I said, Douglas Luiz was an $80 million player. If he recovers half of that, a $40 million player is a very good central midfielder, right? That's roughly what Conor Gallagher went to Spurs for. Maybe he went for a little less, so better than Conor Gallagher, who's a very good player. So like there's value there, and he can still be useful, and he can still be very good for us over the back half of this season. So yeah, if this is what pushes us up the table, I'm here for it. I do also like that, it's I can't erase in my attempt to be lukewarm the fan in me that is just super excited about getting three guys back who are obsessed with this club. Tammy Abraham says that he's watched every game since he's left. We know that he's tried to come multiple times. He waived different payments and fees and all that kind of stuff to get here. Douglas Luiz, we don't even need to question whether he's lying or not. He said it on stream. You can go find the clip where he said that he really missed Villa. Obviously rejected Arsenal numerous times to stay here, which I know Chris loves. And that's been reported on that he really stayed, rejected Arsenal because he loved everything about the club, about Unai Emery, about being in Birmingham. So, it's exciting. Leon Bailey, we saw him crying on the field when it was potentially his last home game last year. Clearly a lot of affection for Villa, the fan base. We talk about his work ethic and how much he's willing to give for the shirt. So having three guys around the club like that who are just going to continue to instill, if nothing else, fight and desire to be here, that's a great thing to have. And sometimes, particularly over the course of a couple months, vibes can carry you that long. And so maybe that does ultimately be what propels us up the table, even if we don't necessarily get a ton of minutes out of them. So, I've been at this for a while. Let's talk about the other end of the coin, the Youri and McGinn of it all. So looked at the calendar. Youri's injury is projected at being about an 8-week injury. So that puts us around March 24th that he would be back. Looks like that would be 12 games missed, depending on what happens in the FA Cup. And so those will be home matches. And this is in order, by the way. So Villa's 12 matches will be home versus Salzburg, home versus Brentford, at Bournemouth, home versus Brighton, home versus Bonesaw FC in the FA Cup. Chris will love that we said that out. Home versus Leeds, at Wolves, home versus Chelsea, the Europa League away fixture, at United, the Europa League home fixture, and then home versus West Ham. McGinn obviously being injured a week or two before, maybe he's ready a week or two earlier. That's a fairly winnable run of games, even not at our peak. Brentford were flying up the table. They've clearly stumbled over the last couple weeks. So hopefully we're kind of catching them at the right time. Obviously, they frustrated us multiple times earlier this season, so it'll be nice to get a little bit of revenge there if we can kind of unify and rally around this a little bit. At Bournemouth, probably at the wrong time. They were really floundering, but they seem to be rounding into a little bit of form. Great win over Liverpool last week. Brighton are what they are. FA Cup, we'll talk about that later. With all the injuries, I'm kind of punting that right now. Leeds hit or miss. Wolves are Wolves. At Wolves is always a difficult game, but like look at what that team is this year. Um, Now the Chelsea United West Ham stretch with the Europa League in between, this is the one that I think we really need to be focused on and concerned, because this will make or break our season, and it'll be really interesting to see where Chelsea and United are at that point. Um, I think there certainly could be some optimism if we're starting to see Youri and McGinn in training a little bit, doing individual drills that ultimately uplift the team. But having to travel to Old Trafford, a place where Villa are not typically successful, with a really crucial Europa League round of 16 tie on either side of it, that that feels like a trap game to me. That feels like one where Villa could certainly slip up. Um, Chelsea home, at least it's at home. But again, with the Europa League on the horizon, that could be another interesting one. And then West Ham on the back half of this stretch, who's still available? Is Onana injured or not? Do we have the legs as these guys are coming back to kind of see that one through? I sure hope so, particularly with how garbage West Ham have been all year. But again, like I said, those last 5 games are the ones where I'm really kind of curious to see what this team is, and how much they have left in the tank as we go towards the final run of the season. Um, Now, will Yori and McGinn even be available at this point? Listed at 8 weeks. Stan Collymore had an interesting tweet. Someone asked him, like, how quickly do you kind of get back up to speed? Is this a situation where after 8 weeks out, yeah, your ankle, your knee, whatever might be a little weaker, and you're certainly strengthening that, but does the rest of your body kind of benefit from 2 months off of rest and recovery? And he had a really interesting response. I would encourage you all to go read it directly, but I'll try and summarize it best I can here quickly. He kind of split it into two. He was like, you can either have an injury where the 8 weeks that they talk about includes your solo work on the field, getting a week or two back with the team, so that like at the end of 8 weeks, that's the club saying that's when you will be 100% uh, fully match fit. Wind is back, like you're ready to go. And he's like, if that's the case, that's great. And McGinn and Yori will be pushing hard, obviously for Villa as well, but obviously to get ready for the World Cup this summer too. What he said, the concern potentially is if it's 8 weeks of just recovery of injury, if it's just going to take 8 weeks for your ligament to get back into place, or whatever it is, then you're probably tacking on a week or two of individual work, a week or two of teamwork while you get your cardio back, your fitness back, so that you're 90 minutes match fit again. If that's the case, he was like, I'm concerned whether they'll play again this season. I looked at it. If you tack on another month, if you just kind of take that at face value, then they would miss Forest, Sunderland, and Fulham. And they're basically just back for the final 3 to 4 matches of the season in and around May. Um, that becomes a much more nervy proposition of whether Villa can essentially float without them for the rest of this year. So we'll need to see. We gotta hope that they recover quick. Yuri obviously already out earlier this year for a significant period. Um, McGinn seems to get injuries here or there every year that we miss, but we'll need Dougie to play well. We'll need Ross Barkley to come back to fitness and be the player that he was earlier this year for a consistent period, and we'll need to protect Amadou Onana best we can. Um, Basically, we're looking at 4 fit central midfielders, right? You got to think in the holding spot, you have Onana and Bogard kind of rotating match in, match out. And then in the 8 spot, you've got Luiz and Barkley rotating match in, match out. Maybe Luiz probably plays like 2/3 of those and Barkley 1/3. Um, and if that's the case, like that could work. I actually do have a lot of faith in Lamar Bogard to fill in for 6 games as as a six. I really hope that Unai Emery doesn't press his luck and play Bogard and Onana together too often, because I do think that that's a recipe for Onana at the bare minimum to get injured. And so if you just kind of rotate them in, match out, kind of like we've been doing with our left backs with Ian Matson and Luka Dean, depending on opponent, depending on um, how quickly the matches come, that that should be able to get over the line. There's enough talent there with Morgan Rogers, with Emi Buendia, with Leon Bailey in front of them, um, and with Tammy and Ali up top that like, and a great defense behind them, by the way. Our defense is finally healthy, and we've got two great banks of four. Well, actually, I'll say we've got 7 good players, and then Andres Garcia, TBD. Um, but a great defense that can rotate in and out behind them as well to provide them a little more cover. I think that that is enough to get it done. The other thing here that is a rotational piece. Now, I don't know how much we really would ever play him in that 8 left-sided central midfield role. I know he's a little bit more of an advanced player, but Harvey Elliott is also someone that can rotate in and out. He's already been in the Europa League squad, got 5 minutes against Feyenoord. And it does seem like Villa have negotiated some agreement with Liverpool to get a few more appearances before that clause is triggered. So he's someone that we might see rotating in and out to spell Buendia, to spell Morgan Rogers through this stretch run. And if that's the case, if we can do that without triggering the 35 million for a player that Unai clearly doesn't rate, I'm totally fine to give him the time. I think it's necessary. So what else? Nothing super credible at the moment. There have been some links to Harry Wilson, who is a winger. I'm not sure totally how that helps our center midfield crisis, but it does give us another rotation piece in case something does happen to Morgan Rogers or Emi Buendia. And so I'm here for the insurance, I suppose. But I haven't necessarily seen that accelerating too much. That seems like something his agent might have thrown out there to get some money out of Fulham. But I do think that we'll see at least one more body come in with our financial situation probably on loan. As I said before, the Dougie Luiz links were before Youri got injured. I think he was more of a McGinn rotational replacement. And so I think they're going to see a need for one more body. Again, we don't really have cover if Buendia or Morgan Rogers goes down. So I think we might see someone in an attacking role, or maybe someone who can kind of play, kind of like Youri Tielemans, plays the 8, plays the 10, maybe someone who can fit in that kind of a hybrid role to just give us a few more bodies. Now, this isn't someone that we could register for Europa League, presumably, but at least in the Premier League, it could give us a little bit more squad rotation. And why not the Europa League? Again, as we learned last year with the Champions League, you can only register 3 new players at the end of the group stage. So I would presume those are being filled by Leon Bailey, Tammy Abraham, and Dougie Luiz. I guess if we brought in someone new, Leon Bailey probably drops out of that and is just eligible in the Premier League, but we'll see what happens there. So I think that's all the thoughts at present. Chris may have some more, so we'll pick his brain a little bit when we get to our Salzburg recap and kind of look ahead to the Europa League playoff phase. Who's playing who could Villa potentially get matched up against? And yeah, wow, a lot of pods this week, at least 4. So you guys are real lucky, but yeah, wanted to make sure that you guys got our thoughts to this one real quick. Make sure to slide tackle into those DMs. Let us know what you think of the Douglas Luiz deal and why Villa may have done this. Is this an indication that they're looking to really compete for the title, like Unai Emery will not admit they are? Who knows? But we'd love to hear from you. So, as always, everybody, up the Villa. Hi, Mom and Dad.